Hey, everybody. Welcome to our percussion hang. This is July 2022. Welcome back to World Drum Club. We are live with a friend, a colleague, an amazing musician, educator, recording artist, blah, 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 blah. I could keep going all day, but I'm not going to. I'm going to just say hello and welcome everybody to Randy Gloss. There he is. Welcome,
Hi,
Randy.
everyone. Thanks for
Thanks for
having
being.
me. Yeah, my pleasure. Are you kidding?
Yeah, here we are in our little cozy man percussion caves. So you've already been on the channel doing some videos. By the way, if anybody has not seen Randy's videos, they're on the World Drum Club. You can search his name, Randy Gloss, and they'll probably come up. But was that pre-COVID?
It was right before. I think it was like the month before. It was like February 2020.
I think
So
it
now that
was.
we're coming out the other side, Kalani, I would love to come back to your studio and do actually be there in the same room doing some more lesson stuff. So
Yeah, we're gonna do that. We're gonna do that.
I'd love it.
So for people who, and they should be, but if they're not familiar with you and your work, give them the elevator, speech. What are you doing, Randy? What's going on?
Well, at the moment, actually, I'm just kind of gearing up to release what will be my second solo percussion album. But as far as some other things, for the past 25 years, I was really busy with a percussion group called Hands Ensemble. I ended my association about a year ago, just to get into other things. We were all kind of moving in different directions in life. But, that group, we made 5 albums, traveled the world. We did some film soundtracks together. We've done a lot of work. So if people want to know about my work, that's a big bulk of it right there. It's just exploring Hands Ensemble, Googling that and seeing where that takes you. But you can go to my website, randygloss.com, and you can find tons of audio and video and content and all my discography and information if you want to kind of explore some of the different things that I've done. But, as I mentioned, right now I'm just kind of really excited about releasing, what will be my second solo percussion album.
Could you talk a little bit about the concept or the motivation or behind this album?
Yeah, I always I never thought of myself as a solo artist in that regard. And about 8 or so years ago, there's a gentleman named Carlos Nino who used to have a radio show on Sunday nights on KPFK called Spaceways Radio, and he's a really fantastic radio personality and very knowledgeable. About 10 years ago, he started shifting out of radio and getting into performance. And since then, he's released several albums that have done quite well under the moniker of Carlos Nino and Friends. And actually, I played on a good 3 or 4 of those albums as well. But about 8 years ago, we were doing a concert and he was just emceeing the concert. And somewhere on an intermission, he said, Randy, you should think about making a solo album. And not a solo album where it's like you layering all kinds of stuff, but just you playing. People need to hear you, what you do in your voice as a percussionist. You should think about making an album that way. So about 5-6 years ago, I made the first album of solo percussion. I'm very mindful about it being this very personal and kind of reflective statement through percussion. And then, since then, I'm here in my home studio. I have endless opportunity to kind of compose and record. So since releasing the first one, I've just been kind of, working away, chipping away on the second one. But it was really impetus was totally Carlos Nino, kind of like, you should think about doing that. And I had never thought. I mean, as a percussionist, I always think more as a side artist, working for another artist, supporting their work. Or if I wanted to say something as a percussionist, I always had my own percussion group that I would compose for and kind of produce our work. But the idea of just me, myself, and I, it seemed like a very foreign and distant thing until he said it, and then it seemed suddenly possible.
And so I'm assuming the compositions are all you and all mostly.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and it's all percussion. Is it?
It's totally percussion. Yeah,
totally percussion.
It's a niche thing. I hope that it's a musical statement, and the best compliments I always get back are that people who are not percussionists enjoy it, or that they were having a dinner party and chose to put on the album during their dinner party. Some kind of like thing where it's really clearly not in the forum where a solo percussion album might be presented, when people are still appreciating it. To me, that's the biggest compliment. So I hope that it's a a complete musical statement and people can enjoy it regardless of whether they're deep into percussion and geeking out on the drums or the rhythms that I'm doing, but can find the music and the sentiment in what I'm trying to say as a percussion.
And that's why I'm curious about what are you, if you are. I mean, often when we do music, there's an idea, or there might be a theme. You know, what is the feeling? What's the message? What could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, yeah, for me, this is where the real challenge always lied, was to keep people's interest. You know, in some ways, there's the novelty factor of percussion, right? So you see a percussion concert, you see all these instruments or all these foreign things or different techniques, different sounds. So there's always a certain amount of intrigue, but that becomes novelty and wears off fast, right? So now it's about creating a musical statement, a musical arc. And, you know, the reality is that the world of percussion is so ever expansive. And so many things fall under this umbrella of what is percussion. And so really just exploring that at the same time, really thinking about, regardless of whether it's a violin, a guitar, or a drum, finding the musical statement. What is the subject? What am I trying to say? What am I trying to convey? Emotionally, personally, whatever it is. So it's definitely a compositionally based. There's a lot of composition in all regards, whether it's fixed composition or improvisation. But the idea is really about, what is the subject? What am I trying to say? What is the music I'm trying to make? So hopefully that's the point to anybody when they listen to it, whether they're into drumming or not, will be like, man, that's a cool musical statement, or I like that piece of music, even if I don't know what that instrument is or what meter it might be in or what I'm trying to explore rhythmically. But the music hopefully will stand on its own, hopefully.
I want to relate this to my own experience quickly because I think, I don't know, it might be kind of funny. But my first album, I composed 8 pieces, and then I improvised 1 piece on percussion as just kind of an add-on thing, right? So I composed and produced, you know, like 7 band pieces: drums, bass, guitars, keyboards, steel drums, violins, cello, you know, and I'm so proud of it. And then I had 2 ADATs at the time, right? So I recorded a 15-track, because I had a click track. So 15-track percussion jam. And the idea was that I laid down 1 track, right? Like a djembe or something. And then I recorded everything else to that, right? Everything else followed the original track. So I recorded this thing completely improvised. My mom listens to the album. It's her favorite track, right? And we were talking about people relating to stuff. She's like, I love the one that's all percussion. You should do more of that. And I'm like, oh my God, I spent so much time and energy on all the other ones, of course. I'm so proud of the other ones. But that was the one that was, like, I guess, just the most enjoyable, the most accessible, the most somehow exciting too, because it was improvised. So I don't know. Can you talk about what is your process there? How much of that are you doing? Or is it, you know, what's your process like?
Well, you know, to keep it interesting, I'm always trying to mix it up. So there are definitely compositions that they're compositions. I sit down and I compose, and these are the different parts, and this is the idea. There are other times where it's really a catharsis about letting it out, and it becomes an exercise of flow. And so sometimes it's just about throwing the microphones up and just clearing my mind and just letting it out. And whatever happens, happens. If I like it, great. Now it's another tune for the album. If I don't like it, well, tomorrow is another day. So part of it is a catharsis and practice of just letting it out. Part of it is really about, you know, as a percussionist, as a perpetual student, and as an educator, trying to just connect dots. You know, some of it is experimentation. What if this meets this? What if I take this idea and I turn it on its head? What if I take this other idea and I turn it inside out? So a lot of times that what if becomes my almost like a mad scientist kind of experimentation. This is my laboratory. Let me experiment today. What happens if I try it this way? What if I do it this way? What if I mix this ingredient with that ingredient? In that way, music is no different than, let's say, experimenting in the kitchen. What if I take this ingredient or this spice and mix it with that? You know, that can be the fun of it. Sometimes it's nice to follow a recipe, but sometimes it's nice to put the recipe book away and get a little mad scientist in the kitchen. And I think that's the beauty, too, of music, and not being on the clock with a recording studio where every moment you could just see the dollars are burning away.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so especially the past couple of years with the pandemic and everything, having so much time in my studio and access to everything, let me just cook a little bit. Let's see what kind of recipes I generate. And so every time I'm trying to take a different approach to composition, not just to be different, but because it's so vast. And I'm trying to really tap into myself. That's the common thread through all of it is who am I? What am I trying to say as a musician? And getting really to the crux, to the heart of that matter of like, who is Randy Gloss? What is his perspective as a drummer? Right? There's millions of drummers in the world. What makes me me? And so through all of the process of composing or improvising, hopefully there's always that kind of exposed thing where people can see who am I as a musician.
That's awesome. That's really awesome. And I appreciate the analogies. I also like to cook and I do take a lot of chances, but I
think,
want to pause here.
Real quick, Kalani, I think some of the best improvising cooks are always some of the best improvising musicians. There's something about if you can improvise in music and you can translate into the life that you can improvise in life, then being an improviser in the kitchen comes so naturally. And I have met so many masterful musicians who all seem to love to cook and love to experiment in the kitchen. It's definitely a common denominator, no doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's a life skill. Let's face it. It's a philosophy, or it's an ethos or ethos. It's a way of operating, right? It's and it's useful. It certainly is. I mean, and of course, yeah. Sometimes you make something is horrible. You're like, this is horrible. What was I thinking? But you try it, or you try it. That's the point.
And then taking risks. This is the beauty. Is like in music. I teach this to my students, like improviser in music, improviser in life. It's about that being open and being present in the moment. And so much of our lives, we forget how to be open and how to be present, how to be right here, right now.
Yeah.
But music is really all about that. And this idea of taking a risk, what is the big deal? You try something in music, it doesn't work. There's still ways to tweak an idea and make it work. Play it again. Right. And so same thing with a recipe. Why always follow it? Why not take a risk? Why not try something so it doesn't taste as great? Lesson learned. That one moment is so much more valuable than that forkful to whether it was good or bad. Right. What you learn from that forkful and how to start to find your recipe and shape things. So I think that, taking risks is such an important thing that somehow we all forget a little bit. And we need to remind ourselves that if I take this risk, what is the end result? It's if I take a risk in music, nobody's going to get hurt. Nobody will be injured or die from my mistake. Right. It's a musical note. And the best thing that I can do is make a mistake. I love mistakes because that's how I learn.
Absolutely. We're dropping some serious wisdom bombs here. And I hope people are catching this stuff. I want to pause for a second and just sit with this idea of risk-taking and composition and improvisation. But let me ask you this question around that, because I know some of the World Drum Club supporters and fans are getting recording gear and loopers, and they want to record and practice, not just for practice, because that's part of it, of course. Mastery of skill, mastery of knowledge, knowledge of what are the possibilities, right? What do I have available? How can I play it? But let's take all that as a given for a second. What advice would you give somebody who is looking to dip their foot into this pool? And let's also acknowledge that it's scary for a lot of people because of the fear of judgment from others. But thankfully, we can do this in the privacy of our own home, in our headphones. It's not a public. We're not doing this in public. We're not composing in public. We're not looping in public, maybe. So for the amateur who's getting into recording or composition, they want to make some compositions. They want to do some recordings. What kind of advice would you give, or path would you recommend somebody take in that regard?
Well, I would say step one is don't pay any attention to anyone else in that regard. If people are throwing shade your way, that's their problem, right? It's not your problem. The reality is anyone, whether you're an enthusiast, a hobbyist, a professional, it doesn't matter. We all play music for one general reason, because it's ultimately rewarding and gratifying and fun.
Yeah.
Anything, I always talk to my students about this idea. When I was 5 years old is when I started my journey with drumming. Now I'm 51 years old, so I've been drumming a long time. I feel like an analogy is almost like that spirit of that 5-year-old version of me who just fell in love with the visceral, tactile feeling of hitting a drum and what it felt like in the vibrations and the sound, but that joy, because there was no worrying about criticism for a 5-year-old version of myself. It was just for fun. To me, that's a candle that I have to protect that flame because life wants to blow that out constantly, whether it's just career path, whether it's other people's jealousy, insecurity, whatever it is. I know that as I go through life in all directions, people are trying to blow out my candle. So I'm very protective of that. The same joy that I felt the first time I hit a drum, I want to feel that joy now. The same reason that I wanted to learn more and grow and sacrifice other time and other things I could be doing to sit with my instrument and play. I want to have that same feeling of like excitement and enthusiasm that I'm still on that same path. So for me, it's just about protecting that innocence, that joy of what music really is about. So step one is don't let anybody throw any kind of shade or criticism, constructive criticism, people who want to help, people who want to inform, share information. That's different. But this idea of just kind of dumping on someone's thing because of whatever, that's their thing. And so step one is block that. That's step one.
Yeah.
Second thing is it's all valid. If you have an idea, if you're hearing an idea, you're feeling something, even if you just want to experiment, go for it. That's the joy, is what isn't percussion. So as you're getting into like the high tech part, so for example, on my last album, I did a lot of stuff with the A-frame. And for people who don't know, A-frame is this electronic frame drum. It is as high tech as far as the world of frame drumming can get. Every time I work with that, I also try to go to low tech or no tech. Means found objects, junk percussion, mason jars, spaghetti pots, these kind of things, because they're just as valid as a percussion instrument than this $3,000 piece of electronic gear. You know what I'm saying? And so whether you're recording on your phone or you're recording through an interface or through some very expensive preamps, wonderful that you have this kind of thing, but one is not the only way in. There's not one point of entrance. So even just putting on your phone and recording, banging on a spaghetti pot with some wooden spoons can be just as rewarding and musically gratifying and ultimately lead to something really kind of interesting, just as much as spending time, let's say, with a 5-octave marimba or some piece of expensive electronic gear or whatever it may be. The gear is not the thing. The gear is the vehicle.
Yeah.
Right? It's the car. It's really about the driver, right? Whether you're driving a tractor or a Ferrari, right? It's still about the person that's operating the vehicle. And so I feel the same way about instruments and gear. It's not the instrument. It's not the gear. It's the person and their expression.
Absolutely. That's some really great advice. So I'll just echo that, yeah, it's not about the gear, because where does music come from? When I'm teaching kids, sometimes I ask them, can you point to where the music comes from? And if they start pointing to the instruments, I say, well, that's where it comes through. That's what amplifies it, but where does it come from? And then it's like, yeah, it comes from here, it comes from you, right? Like Baba said, you are the drum, I am the drum, we are the drum, right? Baba Tunde Olatunji.
Of course, yeah. No, it's all connected. I mean, without getting too metaphysical or spiritual, I mean, the reality is everything is music, everything is vibrating, right? And so it's everywhere, right? And it's really about us just kind of organizing, collecting it, and letting it out in whatever means or medium feels natural and kind of in line with what we're trying to say.
So yeah, absolutely. So and believe me, as somebody with a YouTube channel, several YouTube channels, and as somebody who's published a lot even before on VHS and DVD. See, I'm older than you.
I remember all of that stuff, Kalani. Absolutely.
Yeah. I was publishing on wax cylinders. No. The haters are out there, and you know what? One person that had a YouTube channel who's a vocal teacher, he put it really well, and it stuck with me, and I remember it when I need to remember how to deal with that, because it's one thing to say, well, just ignore it, but sometimes it's not that easy. But he said something that I think is really true, because I think we can all relate to this. He said, look, those people that are leaving those comments, like those sort of bullying, sort of mean, like, shade, however you want to call it. He said they're just entertaining themselves. That's what they're doing. Is they're being a class clown, right?
Yeah.
They're entertaining themselves, kind of at your expense, right? They're using you as the target, but what they're doing is really about their own entertainment, right? Or their own self edification. So just remember that and let them do it. It's okay. It's fine. If that's what you want to do, if that's your perspective, go ahead, man. It doesn't matter.
And what I found too is, at least when it comes to me, oftentimes what the criticism that I get, yes, you're 1,000%, it's their thing. It's coming from them. But oftentimes it's kind of the last nail in the coffin, the last word of the argument. They're talking about oftentimes things that are irrelevant or that I couldn't and wouldn't change. So, for example, in my personal musical journey, I've spent a lot of years going deep into a lot of different traditions of drumming. But as a professional musician, that's not my output. My output is to be me. So all of those things are in a pot. I'm a melting pot. So all those things are being melted, and new recipes are being kind of made and created, right? This is how I think about music anyway. So there's always this criticism that it's not this, it's not that. I'm not this. So oftentimes if people are insulting, let's say, my approach, let's say, to tabla and Indian music, it's a criticism about my skin color or that I'm not Indian. Okay, nothing I can do about that, and I'm well aware that I'm not Indian, right? Same thing, let's say I specialize a lot in Brazilian percussion, and pandeiro is one of my very special instruments. But same thing. No matter what I do with that, there's always going to be some person he's not Brazilian, he's not this. Right, I can't be those things. So I play Persian music, I'm not Persian. I play Arabic music, I'm not Arabic. I play African music, I'm not African. I play Brazilian music, I'm not Brazilian. On and on, I could keep going about the things that I'm not. And that's oftentimes the criticism, and the kind of hate is usually coming from this thing of like, I can't be what other people want me to be. Yeah. So I stopped kind of entertaining that, because it's a ridiculous argument. Why do I have to defend myself when it's something that I'm not, professing to be, and something I'm not aiming to be, and something that I could never be anyway? I'm just trying to be me. And the reality is, like, I think the best way is to be open. The world is a big place. Why not explore it? Why go through life with blinders on and tunnel vision? As a musician, as an artist, if I'm going to be open in my heart, I should be open in my mind, open in my ears, open in my eyes, be open. And so the moment that I hear a drum that's exciting, I want to learn it. The moment I hear some music that gets me excited, I want to know more about it. How could that ever be wrong? And so if people want to criticize because I'm exploring cultures that are not my own, well, the level and the depth that I've gone to should show the sincerity and the respect. But the output is my personal statement. I should paint the way that I want to paint, not the way that other people should tell me I should paint. It's my picture. I paint how I want to paint. And therefore, all those other comments, to me, it's like the last argument. You're talking about a non-issue. That, oh, really, my skin is not the right color, or I'm not the right gender, or I wasn't born in the right part of the world. Nothing I can do about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to touch on the issue of that, where a lot of that comes from is people that learn a little bit, right? And then they become like the police, right? What we used to call the clave police, right?
Right.
And let me just, and that's a space that I think a lot of people enter into because they want to get it right? And they want to think that I know this is the way it goes. My teacher taught this way, and he's the best or she's the best, and now you're not doing it right. There's all those discussions, which are, to me, very small-minded. However, there is a time for learning the sort of traditional. I don't like to use the terms correct or incorrect. I like to use the term traditional or customary, right? So when you play djembe or you play tabla, there are traditional and customs, right? There's traditions and customs, which you can definitely acknowledge. And I think if you're going to go teach, then you want to say, well, this is the traditional, this is the way they do it in this area most of the time, right? But your point about this is me playing now, this is my composition. Yeah, I'm not trying to be those things, and you shouldn't try to be those things. Why are we trying to replicate?
I'm sorry, Kalani, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No,
I
but
was
it's the point is that sometimes people assume that we're always trying to replicate what's been done with like if I play a wawonko on congas, like I'm trying to sound like I'm from Puerto Rico or Cuba. I'm not. I'm not ever going to sound like I'm from Puerto Rico or Cuba. I'm not pretending to be, but I can use the idea of a wawonko or the platform of a wawonko to play something that I play.
Absolutely. Look, I think that this idea of representation and context, these are two very important terms, right? If I'm saying now I'm representing a culture, this is rumba, this is wawanko, now I can represent or I can misrepresent.
Right.
Now there's a right or wrong, like Randy's teaching this wrong. He's misrepresenting this rhythm or this culture. That's very different. And so as an educator, I'm very clear about the information, where it comes from, all of that, the context, that's the next part. Because am I trying to play traditional music, or am I creating something new based on different traditions? Because music grows when the world kind of gets closer together, and not just now in 2022.
Mm-hmm.
Go back to, let's say, Beethoven. Beethoven is, to me, he's the first world music composer. Because in the Western world, he was the first one to look to non-Western instruments. Why the orchestra has timpani and cymbals and all of these, it's Beethoven that really opened the door. He was listening to Turkish music, which at the time they were calling janissaries. He heard tambourines and timpani, which are Persian and Indian of origin, and brought them into the orchestra. They became Western instruments. But this is hundreds of years ago we're talking. It's not a new thing. You know what I mean? This idea of being open to sound and instrument and exploring it and applying it. This is how music evolves and grows. At that point, you're not saying that this is Turkish music. Beethoven was never saying, this piece I wrote is a Turkish song. No, it's based on something from the janissaries. I was inspired by the janissaries at this time and the sound of their drums, and I wanted to bring it into the orchestra. This idea of being inspired by and utilizing it in your way is very different. So to me, how you represent and the context of your music, these are things that should define it, right? Because at that point, if you're just looking at it, is Randy trying to say this is tradition, or is this his music? Well, the context will show it. It's his solo album of creative music using all of these ideas. It's not an album of traditional West African drumming.
Right. Yeah, and that's why it's so important for us all to be aware of the lens that we're viewing others through too, because then those are our biases. And then if we project like through if we look at somebody through our own lens and then we say somebody else is wrong, that's ridiculous. That's a ridiculous thing to do.
Well, even that is funny when people get into the absolute. You were talking about, let's say, the clave police. This idea of the clave police, if we're going to apply that, let's say, to like how people play rumba in, let's say, Havana or Matanzas versus how they play in Miami versus how they play in New York versus how they play in Chicago versus how they play in Los Angeles. The same rhythm is not the same rhythm, not put the same way. Styles change because what? Geography is different. People are different. It starts to get infused with other elements, right? So this idea that even something that is as specific as, let's say, Wawanko, even on a small island like Cuba, you'll find a few different variations because, no, they play it this way in this town. No, we play it this way in our village. And then you go, whatever it is, 60 or 90 miles across the water to get to Miami. And then all of a sudden, boom, it's a whole other thing. And then you go up the coast of New York and again. Yeah. This idea that anything is just one thing. No, music is always in flux, always in transition, always evolving. It is not a picture in a frame on a wall for perpetuity.
Yeah, absolutely. And in my experience, which is just my experience, but I've been doing this a while, like you. It's the people who learn a little bit that are the most judgmental and like the most scolding of others, and the people who have been around a long time, the master musicians, they're chill. They're okay. They're like you. They're like, do your thing. Do what you want. Like, make music. Be creative.
To be honest, there's like Superman has power and kryptonite. The kryptonite, the thing that pulls you down, are all the haters that peck away and make you doubt yourself. And am I doing it right? Or is this wrong? Or am I appropriating? Or am I whatever? All these things that you start to doubt. But the thing that gives me the power is those people that are the true masters that I look up to, that I've studied, that I learned from, that I listen to. when they're complimentary. Randy, I heard what you did, and wow, I never thought like that. Or I heard how you took this idea and this, or I could hear the depth of your knowledge in your playing, whatever it is. The moment that I get some praise from somebody, it's like all of a sudden I'm taller. It's empowering. And so
Yeah.
I look to that, because the people who are the subject are never the ones that throw the shade or the hate. They always show the support. Like, I could see how much love and time you put into my culture, into my music. There's
Hmm.
always a certain amount of like, thank you for doing that. Because otherwise, if people stop caring, people stop studying, people stop learning these subjects, they vanish. How
Yeah.
many different traditions of music have already vanished from the planet because people are just not bothering with it? So anytime an older master hears somebody that's maybe not of that culture, that is spending the time to really get that knowledge and to understand that music, there is going to be some appreciation. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for being a torchbearer. Thank you for not only learning this tradition, but passing it along, and for making it your own.
Yeah.
That now it has a certain relevance that maybe is not the tradition, but you can see that it's inspired by that tradition, done with reverence to that tradition.
Right. Yeah. And there is that part of it. And I think that's amazing. There is the kind of journeyman position that you can enter into, especially with the Indian music, where it's an apprenticeship, really, right? If you're a student. And then on the other side of that, like I'll just use one example. I was traveling to China a bit before COVID, and there's this interesting new, I guess you could call it a genre of mostly women singers playing djembe. And the way they hit the djembe, the way they play the djembe is completely not traditional. I mean, if you had the traditional djembe, West African djembe player mindset, and you saw how a lot of these Chinese women were playing djembe, it just your head would explode. But they have their own genre. They're not using it in the traditional way. They're using it to sing Chinese folk songs and accompany themselves. And it's just a new thing,
Right.
So again, you can embrace it and you can say, let me just listen to this for what it is, instead of judging it for what it's not,
Right, and to me,
that's up to us.
until the actual artists are saying that this is what we're calling this traditional djembe, that this is what we learned from Ivory Coast or from Mali or from Senegal. The moment that it's now being misrepresented, now I think you're opening the doors to criticism. But this idea that we're taking this instrument, which is just a vehicle, and we're steering and driving that vehicle in our way to make a different point, that shows another facet. It just shows how deep and how broad, how much scope one instrument can have. That all of a sudden how old is the tradition of djembe, but all of a sudden people are bringing a whole new aesthetic, a whole new approach, a whole new thing, a whole new facelift on an instrument, and it still can support. To me, it just shows how deep the djembe can actually be. It just adds more weight and validity to that. But
Yeah.
until somebody says this is something that it's not, where's the criticism coming from? Because people are just playing music and expressing themselves.
Yeah, exactly. So Rebecca, and I want to invite everybody to ask questions now. You can put them in the comments, or you can, like, I don't know how do you raise your hand here in the Zoom space, but go ahead. You can either literally raise your hand, or I think there's like a little emoji thing that you can use. But Rebecca wants to know, what are a couple of your favorite drums?
Oh, geez. Yeah. Well, if I just start to like go around my my room, you'll see that there's drums everywhere. And so this is part of my problem. Hi,
Hmm.
my name is Randy, and I have a problem. And I never met a drum that I didn't like. This is the thing. And it just as a growing up, the first thing was always drum set, snare drum, these kind of things. Oh, you want to learn to play drums? This is what you should be doing. But the moment that any musician or music opened a pathway and I saw another instrument, what is that? I have to check. And so I've just been on this path of endless curiosity. I mean, I think there are certain ones that really have gone into a deeper place. Obviously, drum set is my first love since I was a little kid. So there's a reverence for that instrument because it's always been this kind of thread throughout. But the past 27 years, I've been very deep in studying North Indian tabla, and it's endlessly fascinating, endlessly rewarding, humbling, and at the same time inspiring. And so even if I don't always use it, let's say, as a professional tabla player, what it's given me as far as a work ethic, as far as a practice kind of habit, discipline as a musician, language about taking rhythm and really switching it into this language idea. I would say that tabla has been a very important instrument for me. I love all kinds of anything that I can put my fingers on. You know, this is something that I came to realize later on. I love drumming, but the moment that now my hands are on the instrument, there's a different feeling. There's this tactile thing. There's no medium between the vibration and me. So any kind of hand drum, in particular, things that vibrate a lot. Like I love frame drums simply because the membrane is thinner. There's something about when my fingers touch it, just how it makes my hands kind of feel, how I can feel the vibrations going in my fingers and up my arms. There's something, I don't know, that's just endlessly rewarding and personal about a frame drum. Maybe it's also that it's not disruptive to anyone around, that I can play anytime, any place, where some drums, I think there's a designated time and a place that is appropriate. Otherwise, you start to annoy everyone around you.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. But there's something about a frame drum that's just been a great travel companion no matter where I go and where I'm at. There's something that's rewarding. I love tambourines. I have a thing. I'm a tambourine junkie. And I think that it's, again, back to my root. As a little kid, drum set is what? Skins and metals. And so suddenly, you know, getting into this idea of frame drumming, but now there's these frame drums that have little cymbals. It helped kind of bring everything full circle for me. So I love frame drums, but in particular, things like rick and pandero and these kind of instruments where it's a frame drum with jingles. That little added extra that just connects it home for me. And so all of those kind of instruments have a deep personal place too, I would say.
Nice. That's awesome. Another question is not about the other instrument, which is vocalizing. So Anil asked, do you use konako or solkatu or vocable systems?
Oh yeah, for sure. You know, the neat thing is, you know, minus like the Western music world, most music is an oral tradition, oral, right? So this idea of like hearing it and repeating, singing it and playing it back, you know, I don't think that one culture necessarily has the copyright on that, because all drums speak, right?
Right.
I think that most cultures, if they haven't embraced just jotting it down this way, there is some communication through an oral tradition. And I think that it's endlessly fascinating, expressive, but it also, there's something in the way that it goes into you and it goes into others. So for me, as a learning process, the more I sing, the easier it is for me to memorize, to bring out the phrasing, to bring out the music. As a teacher, it helps me to convey. I think that, you know, as a performer, it gives life 3 dimensions, where sometimes writing things out and having to learn everything through your eyes and then figure out where the phrasing is. I think there's a clarity that comes from recitation. So yes, as someone who spent a lot of time with Indian music, of course, like tabla has its own language that goes with it. Solkatu is something that, you know, and konako, to me, they're just 2 sides of a similar coin.
Could you talk about the differences and maybe demonstrate a little?
Yeah. So solkatu is this idea of rhythmic study of South Indian, but without a drum. But we're just dealing with rhythm. So oftentimes it's just to get rid of numbers. So if I were to think about, like, we're in 5, instead of thinking about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now if I think about taka, takita, taka, takita, now am I having syllables that express shape of the rhythm, but groupings within the rhythm, as opposed to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 even pulses. Now I have this idea of taka, takita, taka, takita, taka, taki. I could see the division. I could see where is the articulation, the attack, where are the strong beats versus the weak beats. Because in rhythm, this idea of what is pulse, what is rhythm. You know, a pulse, if I think about bop, 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 pulse. But until I have some sense of a strong beat versus a weak beat, there's no way to identify a rhythm. What meter was I in? What was the rhythm? Or was it just a pulse of recurring 1? Like an old school metronome, click, 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 click. But the moment that I can put in strong and weak, long and short, which now equates to this idea of twos and threes. Now we're getting away from the idea of pulse and into the world of rhythm. And that's a universal thing, whether I'm studying Brazilian rhythm, Indian rhythm, African rhythm, jazz rhythm, doesn't matter. Rhythm is rhythm in this regard. So solcatu, it to me is a great way to get into, to get rid of the numbers, because numbers, let's say I'm not in 5, let's say I'm in 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 1, 2, 3, 4. First off, now it's hard to find because it's a larger shape. But now we've got multiple syllables, 11, right? So how do there's a limitation, tempo, rhythmically, articulation, all of that. But also I'm now dealing with this shape of 11 pulses. There's no real shape. But if I look at that 11 and I say, okay, what if I make it 4 plus 3 plus 4? Tagadimi, tagada, tagadimi, tagadimi, tagada, tagadimi, tagadimi, tagada, tagadimi, tagadimi, tagada, tagadimi. Now I can see these groups of where the strong versus the weak. I could see that 4, that 3, and that 4. And if I use numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, there's a limit of how I can articulate just to get them out of my mouth. But they're designed for articulation at fast tempos. Goes right to the heart of the matter. So solcatu is really about this idea of just using the syllables to express rhythm through study, as opposed to numbers. Now, conical is based out of solcatu, but conical is now a stage art. Means now it would be like if I'm going on stage and instead of taking my drum solo on my drum, I'm going to vocalize that drum solo. Because now we're introducing the syllables of the drum, the contour of lows and highs, maybe even the modulation of some of the sounds that I'm using. So it's really almost more like Indian beatboxing, where I'm really trying to now define my voice as a drum, as opposed to before I'm thinking about tagadimi, tagada, tagadimi. It's all very flat minus the accents, right? The strong and the weak. But if I start to like doom ta, now all of a sudden doom is low, ta is high. You're starting to see a little bit more contour. And so this is where solcatu kind of gets into conical. Conical is really more about vocalizing the drumming aspect. And solcatu is really about just the idea of studying rhythm and using the syllables as a rhythm study.
Oh, awesome. That's a great explanation. See, I never knew that. So I'm glad that was asked.
Yeah, but there's convergence, right? I mean, there's definitely, solcatu phrases that are conical phrases and vice versa. But oftentimes if someone says this is conical, you're going to hear more of the depth of the bass and the high of the high and the mid of the mid and more of the drumming phrases as opposed to just syllables that are counting syllables.
Right. Awesome. Another question is, who are some of your inspirations or mentors in the area of Latin percussion?
Okay. When I was younger, there was a few people. I used to live in New York, and there was an amazing place right on the edge of Spanish Harlem called Boys Harbor. And I went there for a few years, and I had a conga teacher there named Frankie Malabe, who was really an amazing musician. There was another guy, Victor Rendon, who I studied with for a while there, was also amazing. But another conga teacher that I had was a guy at Queens College named Michael Lipsy, who is the head of the percussion program at Queens College, but also a very, very learned guy. And so those were kind of teachers that I had as far as congas. As far as hand drummers that really were mentors, the number one I have to mention is John Bergamo. He was like a father figure for me. And even though John wasn't a conga player, he really helped me to open up these other doors of like, now that I have some facility and I understand about clave and rumba and these kind of things, how do I find my way? So the earlier conversation when I was talking about how I really am a mixing pot and doing my way, a lot of that I owe very specifically to John. And if you look at John's music and John's career, you could see he was thinking this way and doing these things before I was even born.
Yep. Yeah, John was a pioneer for sure, and just blazed the trail for so many other people. Another question or just a topic would be, as a request, comments on, I don't know if you have any more specifics, Anil, but comments on timba And then Afro Conga expression and Afro-Cuban Candido. I'm not sure what's the question exactly, or do you want to Randy just talk about those topics? Or you can see him, Randy, right? Can you see the chat?
I'm looking in the chat. I see who were some of your strongest inspirations for mentors
Yeah,
for
scroll
Latin
down a little
percussion.
bit.
I think that's maybe I'm somehow missing. I don't have it.
Oh, I'm sorry. So yeah, that one was only sent to me. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Um, so yeah, if you have questions for Randy, yeah, you can send them directly to Randy or put them in the group so he can see
But
them too. But
looking and reading the question now, I also want to say, as far as inspirations, it's not just personal mentors and teachers. It's also people that really open doors and kind of break down these kind of perceptions. And so when we're talking about Latin percussion, there's so many now in looking at there's so many people that I could mention that really are about this idea of disseminating and passing along information for empowering next generation of players and giving room and opportunity. And
mm-hmm.
also some great musicians along the way that have really knocked down certain barriers, like a Giovanni Hidalgo or someone like that, that has really just done so many things outside the context of what is traditional.
Yeah,
And because of where he's coming from and who he is, he almost gets a hall pass for taking those risks. So I've seen it throughout his career, risk after risk after risk, whether it's an ensemble risk, a musical risk, a rhythmic risk, whatever it is. I think that he takes a lot of risks and has done a lot for pushing that ceiling where otherwise people are very traditional minded. I think that
yeah,
he's in a position where he's kind of been carte blanche to break that glass ceiling over and over. So definitely for sure.
absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's now I'm seeing this thing about Candido. Yeah, absolutely. There's so many people along the way that I think that have a larger vision of what the instrument and the music can do than it's just being boxed in a tradition. And so that would be a perfect example of somebody from an older generation that was
Mm-hmm.
thinking about this long before I was even around. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. As we, I can't believe we're almost, getting ready to wrap up here. But as we wrap up, I just want to make sure people know how to connect with you, how they can get their hands on. I saw you had vinyl, right? Press of your new
Oh yeah,
album. Is that right?
that's to me that's the format that I dreamt about it. When I was going to make an album, you know, like a lot of people, I grew up in the era of physical music. There's something about a vinyl and reading liner notes and putting a record on a player and turning it over. There's just something about the experience of, and again, being present. When you're listening to a record, there's something that just makes us more present than putting it on Spotify and letting it just go.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I made each of these albums, their format was essential to me. That's the matting and the frame. Percussion, that's my brush stroke, that's my paint, that's how I'm conveying. That's the picture. But the frame to me is the format. And so I was very specific that both of my solo albums are intended to be, they're both double vinyl records, and they were both conceived that way from the get-go, that this is the ideal format for these records. Yes, they're out there on CD and they're out there in digital download and streaming like everything else in the world, but the real intended format for my albums, very intentionally, was the double vinyl format.
That's pretty cool. And as you're talking about that, I'm just reminded that you can't just swipe away an album you're listening to, right? You can't. It doesn't work on a record player. So it does require you to be present and focused and listen and commit to listening. It's not just my friend messaged me, and swiping and swiping and swiping and just having scatterbrain or scattered attention.
And as we started the conversation, we were talking about composing for percussion. It's very easy to grab someone's attention, but then to hold their attention, right? And especially just in one medium, whether it's all percussion or all violin or whatever it is. And so the idea of an order is very important. And I think that this was something that a lot of time used to go into this. And now it's very arbitrary because people are releasing singles or just things are on shuffle and streaming. And so even this idea of spending, a ridiculous amount of time thinking about what is the order, and then a record can only fit so many minutes per side.
Mm-hmm.
But now it's like, how do I make the ideal side, and what will be the intent of this one side versus once you flip it over, now there's another journey happening on side two. And then you can choose to stop listening at that point, or am I going to go down to the second disc and put on side three?
Mm-hmm.
You know, so there's just something to me about that brings you on the journey more when it's this visceral, tactile thing like a record that we just don't get in the digital age anymore.
See, to bring it back to the food analogy, you've invited people into a restaurant for a dining experience, not to go through a drive-through window. Just
right,
pick up
right.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah, because look, it's great to have access to what we have access to, right? Streaming, all this stuff, but it sort of sets everybody loose to this idea of like I can pick up something, but I can just throw it away just as easily. And like you said, singles are fine, but then the gatekeepers now of the experience, the listening experience, are not the people who designed an album like you were just describing. That was it, but now it's out of your hands and it's on Spotify, it's on Apple. Because what I see when I see streaming now, it's about playlists, right? It's about genres. So you don't see albums there. You see, here's all this chill music, and here's all this music, and here's all that music. Yeah, so it's a whole different. And I'm not saying it's bad or better than, I'm not comparing them that way. I'm just saying that's just a reality.
But it was something that for me, it was definitely built into the design from the very first, when I was like, okay, I'm going to make a solo album. The format was this essential thing. And I've had other albums, like 2 years ago in December 2020, I released a duo album with Pete Lockett, who's another percussionist. So percussion duo album.
Yeah.
Because of finances, because of the time, it was December 2020, right in the thick of the pandemic, we decided let's just make it a digital release. As rewarding as making the album was, and the music, I'm very proud of that album. I couldn't be less, I don't know, fulfilled than when once it was released in the digital realm. It was like, And then from there, it was almost like it was just in the wind, in the ether. I know we made this album. It's out there on iTunes and Spotify and wherever else you can stream. But the fact that it never made it into the physical realm, that I can't hand this thing to somebody, there's something that made it in the end feel a little bit less for me. And because these albums, these are very kind of personal in a way, reflective, that idea of it being in a physical, tangible thing where I can hand it to somebody, it's an object of art, not just this listening thing. There's something more for it for me that again, as a personal statement, it means more. So nothing against, I'm glad we live in a world of streaming. We're at my fingertips. If I want to find a tune, boom, I can find it. There's something beautiful about that. But there's also that's something that makes the listener a little bit complacent, a little bit lazy, a little bit spoon-fed to whatever Spotify's algorithms start to feed you. And then this idea of the record, the album, that there's an art to that. There's artwork and liner notes. In both of my albums, liner notes are an important thing. I'm telling a story through percussion and playing all these different rhythms and all these different instruments that people might not know. So having a booklet that they can kind of go along that journey and have this booklet to kind of read the behind the story is also an important thing where I'm not going to get that when it's just one tune put on, a playlist on Spotify.
Right. Oh yeah. And that's one thing that frustrates me about the streaming services is it's hard to even get the information when you want it. You don't often see who played on this. Who are the musicians? You have no idea.
Well, and that was part of my growing up journey. I have to say that as a kid, it was like an after-school thing to go to record stores with my friends and find some jewel. Look what I found. And then, you buy this, I'll buy that. And then a week from that, we'll trade. But how I learned about so many musicians was liner notes. Who played on this record? Who did this? And then it becomes a history lesson where that musician, I connect the dots to another musician and going back in time through these liner notes and learning the story of the music history, the repertoire, so many things.
Well, I want to get my hands on the vinyl and check out your album because
this is
there it is.
There they are. Yeah, this is the
Hey.
first one. This came out in 2015 or 16. It's very easy to find online,
Uh-huh.
no problem. This
Okay.
one will come out, official release for this one. This is volume 2. The official release for this one is November 4th. But
Ooh.
I'm doing on my Facebook right now, I have a box of advanced copies, so I'm kind of out the back door, kind of like blowing them out to anybody who wants them.
Oh,
So
nice.
people find me on Facebook. I'm kind of like blowing out copies of this, even though the label doesn't really know about it. I have a box. The pre-order through the label will start, August 5th. Orenda
Okay.
Records is the label that's releasing this, so August 5th will be the pre-order, and the official street date for this one is November 4th. But it's
All
around,
right.
and I have physical copies, so if you just get in touch with me, I can kind of hook you up
All
in the
right.
meantime.
Let's do that.
Yeah,
And I have awesome. A few years ago, I actually invested in a record player and a nice amp and some nice speakers, and so because I like that, I like listening and having a good system to listen to music. I think it's important. So
fun. It's fun. You
remind
know,
people.
I still buy physical music, even when things
Yeah.
are out there streaming. Just buying the physical copy, even if it's not just vinyl. Some people are still releasing CDs. Fine. I
Yeah.
always buy the physical, even if I just import it once into my computer. But now I have the physical. I have the liner notes. I have the artwork, and more for me is the funds go more to the artist than on something like Spotify, where they're getting
Oh
like
yeah.
a tenth of a penny or something for each
Yeah.
the stream or whatever it may be. So just buying
Right.
physical music to me is just a way to keep people wanting to create more music. It just keeps it more vital, more, I don't know, a healthy environment.
Yeah. And we could talk about the money side. We're not going to talk about it now, but it's a stream. It is a stream, but it's a drip for the artist. It's a drop.
You know how I've relegated it in this day and age, Kalani, is I think like, if I were a painter, forget about the medium, because to me,
Yeah.
that's all it is. Whether I'm a
Uh-huh.
musician or a painter or a poet, it's all different ways that medium that we're letting it out, right? It's a
Yeah.
catharsis. You have something you want to say, you say it. But a painter is not waiting until they get a commission to paint. A poet is not waiting till the publisher says, we're going to publish your book of poetry to start writing. But somehow in this day and age, because music is become so devalued that musicians are literally just not doing the things we should be doing all the time because financially it's not viable. But I
Yeah.
keep in my mind the way that I'm kind of justifying it to myself is think like the painter. Painter will get out the easel and the canvas and the brush and the paint and do it regardless of any income. But somehow musicians right now are like, there's no money anymore in making an album, so I won't do it. I have something to say. I want to let it out. Whether my albums sell and successful financially, I don't care. The success in any of my albums is, does someone want to listen to it? And if
Mm-hmm.
there's anybody that wants to listen to it, then it's worth me making. Just like if I'm a poet, if anybody wants to read it, that's the reason. Just to let it out. And then from there, if it should sell, if it should make money, wonderful. I mean, we all have bills to pay in the world. But I don't want the impetus of doing it to be a financial one, right? It should be
Mm-hmm.
about that I have something to say as an artist and I want to just let it out.
Yeah. And I'm glad you have that mindset and philosophy
Only
because
way in 2022 to keep saying about it. Otherwise, it's so crazy. Yeah.
well, and to be honest, I mean, World Drum Club and Patreon is a good example of ways that we monetize things in a different way. And then you're right, we do produce the product first and we put it out and then we say, hey, if you like it, support, right? That's kind of the model now. The gate isn't you got to pay me before you get it. The gate is, well, there's no gate. It's here it is. If
Yeah.
you like it, throw some money in the tip jar, I guess. But we're gonna run. Randy, thank you so much.
Yes.
I really,
Before we go, just so everyone knows how to reach me,
yeah.
it's very simple. My name is Randy Gloss, right? So Randy, RANDY, at randygloss.com. That's the easiest way to find me. You can just email me. There aren't too many Randy Glosses in the world, so even if you just Google Randy Gloss, I guarantee you'll find me. Feel free to contact me. I'm very reachable, very accessible, and I love to share. So,
Absolutely. Everybody do that. Do it. Because, life's short and we want to make as much music as possible and individually, but with each other. So we're going to do that. Thank you, Randy. I want to, yeah, you.
Thank you for
Come up here,
having
and
me.
I maybe and,
Special
and
thank
maybe I'll
you.
come up there too. I can bring my remote studio, but yeah, I
Yeah, I
really look
look
forward to it.
forward to being back in the same room and not on a split screen, Kalani. I look
Yeah,
forward to
yeah,
that.
yeah. No, it's all about the hang. To me, it's all about the hang. I'm like, even when I do workshops and classes, if I do like a camp or something, I'm always like hanging the late night hang. You know,
Well, and
I,
the
I
hang
love
is
the hang.
so much, but also with Zoom and spending the last couple of years teaching a lot more on Zoom, the delay that we can't play in real time together is very
Yeah,
frustrating. But there's something again when I connect it to the inner child in me. It's the vibrations.
yeah,
There's something that happens when we're in the room together drumming that I can feel the drum vibrating from across the room. We're vibrating together. The instruments are vibrating the air. There's something that just fills up the space with drumming that on Zoom we just never get that same thing. So I'm so grateful for this kind of platform to be able to kind of keep going these past 2.5 years. But there is just no substitute for being in the same room and playing music together.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Agree 1,000%. So yeah, thank you again, Randy Gloss, everybody. RandyGloss.com,
Thank
Randy
you,
at
everyone.
RandyGloss.com. Check him out. If of course, and if you've liked this, please like before you click away. Hit the bell, subscribe. Blah 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 blah. Thanks to all the patrons who make these kinds of events possible. Patreon.com/Kalani if you want to connect. Thanks everybody. Thanks Randy.
Thank
Appreciate you.
you.
All right, we'll see you guys next time.